Imagine waking up, trying to buy a cup of coffee, and being told your credit card is declined because you're officially dead. Not bankrupt, not flagged, dead. The cashier looked embarrassed. The bank manager looked terrified. And I sat there holding a paper cup that suddenly felt heavier than my entire life. According to every government database, every financial institution, every corporate record, the strange part wasn't that someone had stolen my money. The strange part was that my family had already inherited it. While I was recovering from a coma after a car accident that nearly killed me, my sister had been signing documents with my name. My brother had been selling company assets. My mother had been cashing insurance payouts. And together, they had convinced the world that I was buried. Legally, financially, professionally. The woman who built a multi-million-dollar company no longer existed. At least on paper. What they didn't know was that recovery teaches patience. And patience can be more dangerous than anger. Because while they were celebrating my funeral, I was quietly learning how to come back from the dead. When I finally walked into the room where they planned to divide my fortune, I wasn't there to reclaim my money. I was there to dismantle every lie they had built on top of my grave. This is how my family buried me alive, and how I made sure they could never bury anyone again.
The first sign that something was wrong wasn't dramatic. It was ordinary, which somehow made it worse. Rain tapped softly against the windshield while my driver pulled into a small coffee shop outside downtown Chicago. I had only been discharged from rehabilitation 3 weeks earlier. After 6 months in hospitals, physical therapy centers, and neurological recovery clinics, simple things felt luxurious. Walking without assistance. Holding a warm cup. Remembering where I parked my car. The accident had stolen enough from me already. I wasn't prepared for what came next. The young cashier smiled. "That'll be $6.20. I tapped my platinum card. Declined. I frowned. Tried again. Declined. A third time. Same result. Embarrassing, but not alarming. Cards fail. Banks freeze accounts. Technology breaks. Life moves on. Or at least I thought it did. "Sorry," I said. "I'll use another card." That card failed too. Then another. Then another. The cashier's smile slowly disappeared. Behind me, people shifted impatiently in line. My cheeks grew warm. I paid cash and left. 5 minutes later I was sitting inside a branch office of my private bank. The manager greeted me personally. At first. Then everything changed. The moment he saw my identification, the color drained from his face. Not confusion. Not concern. Fear. Real fear. He excused himself without explanation. I watched him disappear into a back office. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. Employees kept glancing toward me. Whispering. Avoiding eye contact. A cold sensation crawled through my stomach. Something was wrong. Something very wrong. Finally the manager returned carrying a folder. His hands trembled slightly. "Ms. Whitmore." His voice cracked. "I'm not sure how to say this." A strange silence settled between us. Outside the window, traffic moved normally. People walked normally. The world continued normally. Meanwhile mine was about to stop. "Our records indicate that you passed away 6 months ago." I laughed. A short, confused laugh. Because what else do you do when someone tells you you're dead while you're sitting directly in front of them? The manager didn't laugh. Neither did anyone else. My smile slowly disappeared. What? He opened the folder. Inside was a death certificate. My death certificate. My full legal name. My date of birth. My social security number. Official seals. Official signatures. Official validation. Everything looked authentic. Everything looked final. Except one thing. I was still breathing. I stared at the paper. Then stared at him. Then back at the paper. My pulse hammered against my ribs. That's impossible. I understand. No. I leaned forward. You don't understand. My voice came out sharper than intended. I was in rehabilitation. I was in physical therapy. I attended medical appointments. I've spoken to doctors for months. The manager swallowed. According to federal records, your estate was settled after your death was legally certified. Estate. Settled. The word sounded distant. Like someone speaking underwater. My estate. Settled. Who settles an estate without the owner? Then another realization hit. A worse one. Who inherited it? The manager hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. Family. Of course. Always family. The people who spent 6 months visiting me in the hospital. Bringing flowers. Holding my hand. Telling nurses they loved me. The people who cried beside my bed. The people who told doctors not to give up. The people I trusted. The manager lowered his eyes. Your immediate family members. Outside, thunder rolled across the city. I remember that detail vividly. Because in that exact moment it felt like the weather knew something I didn't. I left the bank carrying copies of documents that should never have existed. Death records. Probate filings. Inheritance transfers. Asset liquidations. Corporate restructuring approvals. Every page carried one repeating signature. Mine. Except it wasn't mine. Someone had copied it. Perfectly. The loops. The angles. The pressure points. Every tiny detail. Whoever forged it knew my handwriting intimately. I sat in the back seat of the car while rain blurred the city into streaks of gray light. My hands shook as I turned page after page. Then I saw it. A document approving the transfer of majority ownership in Whitmore Dynamics. My company. The company I spent 20 years building. The company that survived recessions, lawsuits, competitors, and market crashes. Signed by me. 3 months after my supposed death. I stared at the signature. And suddenly I knew exactly who had written it. Victoria. My younger sister. The only person who had ever practiced copying my signature as a joke. When we were teenagers, she'd forged report cards to avoid punishment. Forged permission slips. Forged our mother's handwriting. Everyone laughed because she was talented. Nobody laughed now. The realization hit with terrifying clarity. This wasn't panic. This wasn't opportunity. This was planning. Someone hadn't simply taken advantage of my accident. Someone had built an entire system around it. A system that required lawyers. Accountants. Executives. Witnesses. Paperwork. Approvals. Silence. Dozens of people had helped create my death. And every road led back to my family. The rain stopped as we crossed the river. Sunlight briefly broke through the clouds. For a moment the city glowed gold. Beautiful. Calm. Normal. I remember staring at that sunlight and thinking one thing. If they were willing to bury me on paper, What actually happened on the night of my accident? Because suddenly I wasn't sure the crash had been an accident at all. And that question would lead me somewhere far darker than stolen money. Far darker than forged signatures. It would lead me to the truth hiding underneath my family's grief. A truth so ugly that even now, years later, I still struggle to say it out loud. That evening I drove past Whitmore Dynamics headquarters for the first time since my recovery. The building stood exactly as I remembered. 40 floors of glass and steel. My dream. My life's work. My name still displayed above the entrance. Yet legally it no longer belonged to me. Employees streamed through revolving doors. Security guards chatted casually. Executives arrived in luxury vehicles. Nobody looked up. Nobody noticed the woman sitting across the street. The woman who built everything they worked inside. Then I saw a familiar figure emerge from the front entrance. Victoria. My sister. Perfect hair. Perfect suit. Perfect smile. She climbed into a luxury sedan that used to belong to me. A vehicle purchased with money she never earned. As the car disappeared into traffic, I made a decision. Not out of rage. Not out of revenge. Out of necessity. Because the truth was simple. If I walked into that building tomorrow and announced I was alive, nobody would believe me. The dead don't return. Not without proof. And proof was exactly what I needed to find. So instead of exposing myself, I disappeared. Again. Only this time, it was my choice. And before the week ended, I would step back into my own company wearing a different name, a different appearance, and a completely different purpose. My family thought they had inherited a fortune from a ghost. They were about to discover ghosts can watch from the shadows. And shadows hear everything. 3 days after discovering I was officially dead, I stood in front of a mirror and watched another woman stare back at me. Not completely different. Just different enough. A darker haircut. A pair of thick glasses. A faint scar created by a professional makeup artist who specialized in film productions. The irony wasn't lost on me. My family had turned my life into a performance. Now I was creating a role of my own. The makeup artist never asked questions. Money tends to silence curiosity. When she finished, even I needed a moment to recognize myself. The woman in the mirror looked older. Tired. Forgettable. Exactly what I needed. People notice power. They rarely notice service workers. That blind spot would become my greatest advantage. 5 days later I entered Whitmore Dynamics through an employee entrance I had personally approved years earlier. The security guard barely looked up. Name? Claire Dawson. The fake identification slid across the desk. He scanned it. Nodded. Printed a temporary badge. That was it. 20 years building a company. One forged identity later, I walked back inside without anyone recognizing me. The realization hurt more than I expected. Because companies don't belong to founders forever. Eventually they become systems. Machines. People move on. Buildings forget. I rode the service elevator to the 36th floor. The executive level. The same floor where I once signed contracts worth millions. Now I carried a clipboard and wore a cleaning supervisor uniform. Life has a strange sense of humor. The executive offices smelled exactly the same. Expensive coffee. Fresh leather. Polished wood. Success. Or at least the appearance of success. As I pushed a cleaning cart through familiar hallways, I noticed small changes. My artwork was gone. The charitable foundation display had disappeared. Several longtime employees no longer occupied their offices. People I trusted. People who helped build the company. Gone. Their replacements looked younger. more obedient, more loyal to whoever currently held power. Victoria wasn't merely running my company. She was erasing evidence that I had ever led it. One office at a time. One employee at a time. One memory at a time. The first clue arrived unexpectedly. Near midnight. Most executives had gone home. Cleaning crews worked quietly through empty corridors. I was organizing supply inventories when I noticed two large shredder bins outside the legal department. Normally those bins were sealed. Tonight they weren't. A careless mistake. Or perhaps the first lucky break I'd had in months. I glanced around. Nobody was watching. Then I crouched beside the nearest container. Inside were hundreds of shredded pages. Most were useless. Financial drafts. Internal memos. Routine paperwork. Then I spotted something unusual. A familiar logo. A law firm. My law firm. The same attorneys who handled my estate. My pulse quickened. Carefully, I removed several strips. Then several more. And several more. It wasn't enough to read everything. But it was enough to recognize certain phrases. Death certification approval. Transfer authorization. Emergency succession authority. The dates matched my hospitalization. Not my death. My hospitalization. That distinction mattered. A lot. Because someone had begun preparing inheritance paperwork before I was legally declared dead. Weeks before. Maybe months. Which meant they weren't reacting to my accident. They were anticipating it. I slipped the fragments into my pocket. For the first time, the possibility felt unavoidable. The crash may not have been random. That night sleep became impossible. I sat inside a rented apartment overlooking the river. Pages covered the dining table. Bank records. Medical reports. Corporate transfers. Shredded evidence. I moved pieces around like puzzle fragments, trying to understand how the story fit together. Then another detail surfaced. A date. Small. Easy to miss. 2 weeks before my accident, Whitmore Dynamics had received a private acquisition offer. Nearly $300 million. At the time I rejected it. The company wasn't for sale. Never had been. But after my death? The offer returned. And suddenly Victoria was interested. Very interested. The timeline fit too perfectly. Someone stood to make a fortune if I disappeared. And someone did. The next evening I experienced my first direct encounter with my sister. Not face to face. Not yet. Something better. I overheard the truth. The executive conference room sat partially open. Voices drifted into the hallway. Sharp. Angry. Careless. I paused beside a supply closet. Victoria stood near the windows overlooking the city. My brother Michael paced nearby. Neither knew I was listening. Neither realized the cleaning supervisor organizing supplies 20 feet away was their supposedly deceased sister. You promised this would be finished months ago, Michael snapped. Victoria folded her arms. I'm handling it. No, you're delaying it. The sale isn't ready. The buyers are getting nervous. A silence followed. Then Michael said something that made my blood run cold. We should have sold the penthouse already. The penthouse. My penthouse. Not inherited. Not awarded through probate. Sold. As if discussing furniture. As if discussing inventory. Not the home where I spent 15 years building my life. Victoria looked irritated. We agreed to wait. We agreed because you wanted sentimental nonsense. It's still attracting attention. Michael lowered his voice. Dead women aren't supposed to own property. For a second the room went silent. So did the hallway. Even my breathing stopped. Dead women. Not Sarah. Not our sister. Not a human being. A legal inconvenience. An obstacle. A problem. That's what I had become. Victoria finally spoke. Keep your voice down. Then stop delaying things. Their argument continued. Money. Assets. Shares. Vacation homes. Luxury vehicles. Everything reduced to percentages and ownership. Not once did either mention grief. Not once did either mention loss. Because neither had lost anything. They had gained everything. Or so they believed. As the weeks passed, I became a ghost inside my own empire. Invisible. Ignored. Listening. Watching. Learning. I discovered which executives participated in the fraud. Which accountants altered records. Which attorneys approved forged documents. The list grew longer every day. What shocked me wasn't the betrayal. It was the price. People imagine enormous conspiracies require enormous rewards. Usually they don't. Some participants received promotions. Some received bonuses. Some simply wanted access to power. Most sold their integrity surprisingly cheap. That lesson stayed with me. Because once someone sells their principles for convenience, they become predictable. And predictable people make mistakes. The first mistake belonged to Victoria. I couldn't resist. Not after everything. The opportunity appeared one Thursday night. Her office stood empty. She had left for a fundraising gala. The executive floor was deserted. And her computer remained unlocked. I stared at the screen. A dozen emotions fought for control. Anger. Grief. Disgust. Temptation. Then I remembered something. When we were children, Victoria hated being surprised. Unexpected things terrified her. She needed control. Needed certainty. Needed the illusion that she understood every situation. So I decided to take that certainty away. Slowly. Carefully. One crack at a time. I opened the screensaver settings. Then uploaded a photograph. The last photograph taken before my accident. The image showed my car parked outside a restaurant. Ordinary at first glance. Except for one detail. Reflected in the driver's side window stood Victoria. Watching. Waiting. A detail most people would never notice. But she would. Because she was there. Because she remembered that night. Because she knew exactly what happened after that photograph was taken. I saved the changes. Closed everything. Walked away. And waited. The following morning, I arrived early. Coffee cups appeared. Employees filled hallways. Business resumed. Then, precisely at 8:17 a.m., a scream echoed across the executive floor. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just sharp enough. Just frightened enough. Victoria's office door slammed open. She emerged pale as paper. For a brief moment she looked around the hallway. Not confused. Not angry. Terrified. Like someone who had seen something impossible. Like someone who had seen a ghost. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I smiled. Because fear had finally changed directions. For months I had lived inside theirs. Now they were beginning to live inside mine. What none of them realized was that the photograph was only the beginning. Because buried beneath the fraud, beneath the forged signatures, beneath the inheritance scheme, was a secret even larger than the money. A secret hidden inside the official accident report itself. And once I uncovered it, everything would change. Including the identity of the person who actually ordered my disappearance. By the end of that week, a single file would land in my hands. A file that should never have existed. A file proving that someone altered evidence from the night of the crash. And when I finally opened it, I would discover that my sister wasn't the mastermind. She was only the face everyone was supposed to blame. The moment I realized Victoria wasn't the architect of my downfall, I stopped thinking like a victim. And started thinking like an investigator. Because victims look backward. Investigators look for patterns. The file arrived on a rainy Tuesday. Not through courage. Through guilt. One of the accounting managers I'd known for nearly a decade requested a private meeting. His name was Daniel Reeves. Quiet. Meticulous. The kind of employee most executives barely noticed. Which made him dangerous in the best possible way. People overlooked him. People talked freely around him. People assumed he wasn't paying attention. They were wrong. We met in a nearly empty diner 2 miles from headquarters. The place smelled of burnt coffee and fresh pie. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Daniel looked exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from lack of sleep. The kind that comes from carrying something heavy for too long. When he sat down across from me, he didn't recognize me immediately. Not until I removed my glasses. His face drained of color. The coffee cup nearly slipped from his hand. "Sarah?" I nodded. For several seconds he simply stared. Trying to reconcile reality with everything he'd been told. Finally he whispered. "My God." Not because I was alive. Because he suddenly understood what everyone else had done. Daniel talked for nearly 2 hours. Slowly at first. Then faster. Like a man who'd been holding his breath for months. He explained how certain financial transfers appeared before my death. How unusual legal authorizations surfaced weeks before my accident. How several executives suddenly received extraordinary bonuses after probate was completed. Each revelation deepened the pit in my stomach. But one detail mattered more than all the others. A digital archive. Hidden inside an internal compliance server. A collection of documents executives believed had been permanently deleted. Daniel had copied portions before they disappeared. One folder in particular caught my attention. Accident review materials. The date matched the night everything changed. That evening I opened the files inside my apartment. At first they appeared ordinary. Police summaries. Insurance assessments. Vehicle reports. Medical evaluations. Nothing unusual. Then I noticed discrepancies. Tiny inconsistencies. The kind only obsessive people notice. Fortunately, trauma had turned me into an obsessive person. The timeline didn't match. Several timestamps had been altered. Witness statements appeared edited. One surveillance camera recording had a 23-minute gap. Not hours. Not days. 23 minutes. Just enough time for something important to disappear. Or for someone important to arrive. My pulse quickened. I continued reading. Then I found the original incident photographs. And everything changed. The official report claimed I lost control of my vehicle. A tragic accident. Wet pavement. Poor visibility. Driver error. Simple. Convenient. Finished. Except one photograph showed something different. A detail hidden near the rear axle. A damaged brake line. Not worn. Not corroded. Cut. Cleanly. Deliberately. Professionally. I zoomed in repeatedly. hoping I was mistaken, hoping grief had distorted my judgment. But every image told the same story. Someone sabotaged my car. Someone wanted that accident to happen. And someone later buried the evidence. My hands trembled. Not from fear. From certainty. For months I had questioned myself. Wondered if trauma was making me paranoid. Wondered if my anger was creating imaginary enemies. Now the evidence sat directly in front of me. Cold. Objective. Undeniable. The crash wasn't an accident. It was preparation. I barely slept that night. Every memory felt different. Every conversation. Every warning. Every strange moment leading up to the crash. I replayed the final week before the accident again and again. Then one memory surfaced. A dinner. A family dinner. Nothing dramatic happened. At least not then. But looking back, it felt different. My mother had asked unusual questions about company ownership. Victoria had asked whether my will was updated. Michael wanted details about insurance coverage. At the time I assumed they were making conversation. Families discuss finances. Families discuss planning. Families discuss the future. But suddenly those questions sounded less like curiosity. And more like research. The following week I continued working inside headquarters. Watching. Listening. Collecting. The atmosphere had changed. Victoria remained visibly unsettled. The screensaver incident lingered inside her mind. I could see it. People under stress reveal themselves through habits. Victoria began checking empty rooms before entering. She started locking office doors. She snapped at assistants over minor mistakes. The confident executive persona was cracking. Fear creates pressure. Pressure creates mistakes. And mistakes create opportunities. One opportunity arrived unexpectedly late Friday evening. The executive floor was nearly empty. Most employees had gone home. Only a few lights remained visible. As I passed the conference wing, voices drifted through a partially closed door. Victoria. And someone else. A man. Older. Calm. Professional. The voice sounded familiar. Very familiar. Then I recognized it. Thomas Grant. My attorney. The attorney who managed my estate. The attorney who helped process my death. The attorney I once trusted with everything. I stopped moving. Every instinct screamed at me to listen. So I did. She's becoming a problem. Victoria sounded irritated. Not frightened. Irritated. Grant sighed. You said that 3 months ago. Because she keeps appearing. She's dead. The lawyer's response came too quickly. Too confidently. Almost rehearsed. Victoria lowered her voice. Then explained the photograph. Silence. A long silence. Then Grant spoke again. This is exactly why I warned you. My pulse hammered. Warned you. Not warned us. Warned you. Interesting. Very interesting. Because suddenly it sounded like Victoria wasn't leading anything. She was following instructions. The conversation continued. Most of it involved legal strategy. Asset transfers. The acquisition deal. Risk management. Then one sentence changed everything. One sentence that refused to leave my mind. Grant said, "We're too close to the sale now. Your mother won't tolerate delays." My mother. Not Victoria. Not Michael. My mother. The room suddenly felt smaller. The hallway felt colder. For months I believed greed motivated my siblings. Now another possibility emerged. What if they weren't driving the scheme? What if they were participating in it? There's a difference. A massive difference. One implies opportunity. The other implies leadership. And leadership pointed somewhere I had desperately tried not to look. Toward the woman who raised me. That night I sat alone for hours. The city glittered outside my apartment windows. Cars moved below like rivers of light. Ordinarily I loved skylines. Loved cities. Loved movement. But all I could think about was my mother. Eleanor Whitmore. Elegant. Disciplined. Intelligent. The woman who taught me resilience. The woman who attended every graduation. Every award ceremony. Every milestone. The woman who cried beside my hospital bed. Or pretended to. Because if she orchestrated everything, then none of those tears were real. And somehow that possibility hurt more than losing money. More than losing a company. More than being declared dead. Because financial betrayal attacks your future. Family betrayal attacks your memories. It forces you to question your entire life. 3 days later Daniel contacted me again. Urgently. He wanted to meet immediately. His message contained only 6 words. I found where they hid them. Them. Not documents. Not accounts. Them. The originals. The original contracts. The original signatures. The physical evidence. Everything. My heart raced as I drove across the city. Daniel was waiting inside a parking garage. Nervous. Sweating. Constantly checking over his shoulder. When I approached, he handed me a folded sheet of paper. An address. Nothing else. I looked up. What is this? His answer came quietly. Your mother's vault. For a moment I thought I misheard him. Vault. Not safe. Not filing cabinet. Vault. Daniel nodded. Private residence. Basement level. I stared at the address. My childhood home. The estate where every Christmas dinner happened. Every birthday celebration. Every family gathering. Beneath that house sat the evidence proving my own family erased me. The symbolism was almost too perfect. The lies weren't hidden inside the company. They weren't hidden inside law firms. They weren't hidden inside banks. They were hidden beneath the house where I learned what family was supposed to mean. The following night I parked 3 blocks away. Cold wind swept through the neighborhood. The estate looked unchanged. Warm lights glowed behind tall windows. Luxury vehicles filled the driveway. From the outside it appeared beautiful. Safe. Respectable. Inside, according to Daniel, sat the evidence capable of destroying everyone involved. I stood at the edge of the property and looked toward the house. The place where I learned to ride a bicycle. The place where my father taught me chess. The place where my mother tucked me into bed when I was afraid of thunderstorms. Now I was preparing to break into it. Not as a criminal. As a daughter searching for the truth. A truth buried beneath her own childhood. I took a slow breath. Then another. And stepped forward. Because somewhere beneath that house was a vault. And inside that vault were answers. What I didn't know yet was that before the night ended, someone inside that house would see me. Not Claire. Not the disguise. Me. And the person who saw me would react as though they had seen a ghost walk out of a grave. Because in a way, they had. The security system was newer than I remembered. My mother had always believed preparation was cheaper than regret. Apparently that philosophy extended to hiding evidence. Cold air drifted through the estate grounds as I moved along the rear garden. The mansion stood illuminated against the night sky. Beautiful. Elegant. Deceptive. From a distance it looked like the home featured in luxury magazines. Up close it felt like a museum dedicated to secrets. I knew the property well. I knew every shortcut. Every blind spot. Every service entrance. Because unlike the people now living inside, I had actually grown up there. The basement access point was hidden behind an old wine cellar. Daniel's information proved accurate. A reinforced steel door sat behind custom shelving. No ordinary homeowner installs a vault beneath their residence. Not unless they expect to store things they never want discovered. My pulse hammered as I entered. The room smelled of paper. Leather. Metal. Age. Thousands of documents filled organized cabinets. Insurance records. Property deeds. Trust agreements. Financial portfolios. Generations of wealth carefully catalogued. Then I found the section marked Whitmore Succession. My hands froze. Inside sat dozens of folders. And right there, in plain sight, rested my death. The original forged signatures. The probate paperwork. Corporate transfer agreements. Asset liquidation documents. Every piece of evidence physically connecting my family to the fraud. For a moment I simply stared. Months of uncertainty suddenly became certainty. Months of suspicion became proof. Months of grief became something colder. Truth. Then I heard footsteps. Not distant. Close. Very close. Someone was coming downstairs. I quickly moved behind a storage partition. The vault door opened. Soft footsteps entered. I expected security. Expected Victoria. Expected Michael. Instead, my mother walked in. Alone. Eleanor Whitmore. She looked older than I remembered. Not physically. Emotionally. The confidence remained. The elegance remained. But exhaustion lived behind her eyes. She approached the cabinet containing my file. Slowly. Almost reluctantly. Then she opened it. And began looking through photographs. My photographs. Childhood photographs. Graduation pictures. Company launch events. Images she had secretly stored beside evidence of my destruction. The contradiction unsettled me. Then something even stranger happened. My mother started crying. Not dramatically. Not theatrically. Quietly. The kind of crying people do when nobody is watching. Except this time someone was. Me. For several minutes she remained there. Holding photographs. Looking broken. Then she whispered something. A sentence I will never forget. I'm sorry. The words barely reached my ears. But they changed everything. Because guilty people often justify themselves. They rationalize. They defend. They blame circumstances. My mother apologized. To a daughter she believed was gone. Which meant she knew exactly what she'd done. And exactly how wrong it was. My foot shifted slightly. A tiny sound. Almost nothing. But enough. My mother's head snapped upward. Silence filled the vault. Her eyes searched the darkness. Then found me. For a moment neither of us moved. Neither breathed. Neither spoke. 20 feet separated us. It felt like 20 miles. The color disappeared from her face. The photograph slipped from her hand. And for the first time in my life, I saw genuine fear in my mother's eyes. Not fear of prison. Not fear of exposure. Fear of me. Sarah. Her voice cracked. The room became impossibly still. I stepped forward. Slowly. The disguise no longer mattered. The lies no longer mattered. Only truth mattered. You knew. My voice remained calm. Surprisingly calm. You knew I was alive. Tears filled her eyes. She couldn't answer. And that silence became her answer. What happened that night? I asked. What really happened? My mother closed her eyes. For several seconds I thought she wouldn't respond. Then she did. And everything changed. Your father. The word stunned me. My father? My father had been dead for 8 years. Respected. Admired. Remembered as the family patriarch. What about him? My mother's hands trembled. The debts. The room seemed to tilt. What debts? She laughed bitterly. A small broken laugh. The debts he left behind. And suddenly an entirely different story began unfolding. According to my mother, my father had hidden catastrophic financial losses before his death. Failed investments. Private loans. Gambling obligations. Business guarantees. Millions. Far more than anyone realized. After his death, those liabilities surfaced gradually. Year after year. Growing. Compounding. Threatening everything. The family estate. The trust. The company. Everything. For years my mother fought to keep it hidden. Then creditors began applying pressure. Serious pressure. The kind powerful families pay to make disappear. The kind that destroys reputations. Destroys businesses. Destroys legacies. Then my accident happened. And someone proposed a solution. A terrible solution. A criminal solution. But a solution. Declare me deceased. Access inheritance mechanisms. Liquidate assets. Sell the company. Pay the debts. Protect the family. At least that was the justification. The excuse. The lie they told themselves. Whose idea was it? I asked. The answer arrived immediately. No hesitation. No uncertainty. Thomas Grant. The lawyer. Of course. The lawyer. The man who understood every loophole. Every signature. Every vulnerability. The man positioned perfectly between legality and fraud. But another question remained. A more important question. Who agreed to it? My mother lowered her head. I did. Silence. Pure silence. Because some betrayals arrive with screaming. Others arrive with honesty. And honesty hurts more. She had chosen money. She had chosen reputation. She had chosen fear. Over me. Over her daughter. The next few weeks unfolded carefully. Quietly. Methodically. I stopped thinking emotionally. Started thinking strategically. The evidence was overwhelming. Now I needed consequences. Real consequences. Legal consequences. The kind that survive courtrooms. The kind that survive scrutiny. The kind nobody can escape. So I built a case. Piece by piece. Document by document. Witness by witness. And ironically, the person who helped me most was Thomas Grant himself. Because once confronted with evidence, he became cooperative very quickly. Especially when prosecutors began discussing prison sentences. Suddenly loyalty disappeared. Remarkable how often that happens. By the time the acquisition meeting arrived, everything was ready. The buyers, the executives, the board, the media representatives. Everyone expected a celebration. The sale would finalize. The money would transfer. The story would end. Instead, mine was about to begin. The boardroom occupied the top floor. Floor-to-ceiling glass overlooked the city. Sunlight flooded the room. Millions of dollars sat represented on screens and contracts. Victoria looked confident again. Michael looked eager. Thomas Grant looked nervous. Only now I understood why. Because unlike everyone else, he knew what was coming. The chairman stood. "Shall we proceed?" Victoria smiled. "Absolutely." Then the boardroom doors opened. Every head turned. Every conversation stopped. Every sound disappeared. And I walked in. Not as Claire. Not as a ghost. Not as a rumor. As Sarah Whitmore. Founder. CEO. Owner. Alive. The reaction was almost surreal. Several executives physically stood. One director dropped a pen. A buyer actually whispered, "What the hell?" Victoria looked like someone had stepped into a nightmare. Michael turned white. My mother closed her eyes. Because she already knew. She knew this day was inevitable. I reached the front of the room. Then turned toward the board. "Good morning." Nobody responded. I smiled slightly. Or should I say, "Welcome to my resurrection." The room remained frozen. Then police officers entered behind me. Several federal investigators followed. And behind them came journalists. Camera crews. Legal representatives. Auditors. An entire audience for the truth. The sale was over before it began. For the next hour the evidence spoke louder than I ever could. Forged signatures. Fraudulent probate filings. Illegal transfers. Asset theft. Conspiracy. Obstruction. Document tampering. Everything. Presented publicly. Systematically. Undeniably. One by one the participants realized the game had ended. Not dramatically. Not violently. Quietly. Like dominoes finally reaching the last piece. Victoria cried. Michael argued. Thomas negotiated. Executives panicked. Lawyers whispered frantically. But facts are stubborn things. And facts won. By sunset multiple arrests had been made. Investigations expanded. Assets froze. Accounts locked. Transactions reversed. The empire built on my death collapsed within hours. Exactly as it deserved. Months later the trials concluded. Some participants received prison sentences. Others accepted plea agreements. Several executives lost professional licenses. Thomas Grant never practiced law again. The consequences varied. But consequences arrived. That mattered. As for my mother, the situation proved more complicated. Life rarely provides perfect endings. She cooperated fully. Provided evidence. Testified truthfully. Accepted responsibility. The courts considered those facts. The law reached its decision. But emotionally, nothing felt resolved. Some wounds don't close because a judge signs paperwork. Some wounds stay open. Quietly. Forever. 1 year later I sat inside my restored office. The same office Victoria once occupied. The same office I built years earlier. Outside the window, the city moved forward. As cities always do. Movers rolled a desk through the hallway. The last desk. Victoria's old desk. The final physical reminder of everything that happened. I watched it disappear around the corner. Then looked at the empty space. And finally felt something unexpected. Not victory. Not satisfaction. Peace. Small. Incomplete. But real. Because revenge had never been the goal. Truth was. And truth had finally won. I opened a drawer. Inside rested the original death certificate. The document that started everything. I studied it for a moment. Then fed it into a shredder. Slowly. Deliberately. Watching every piece disappear. The same way they once tried to make me disappear. Only this time. The right thing was being destroyed. People often ask whether I forgave them. I never know how to answer. Forgiveness isn't a courtroom ruling. It isn't a transaction. It isn't something you announce. Maybe forgiveness is simply choosing not to carry hatred forever. Maybe it isn't. I still don't know. What I do know is this. My family buried me on paper. They stole my name. My company. My future. But they failed to steal the one thing that mattered most. My ability to come back. And sometimes, coming back is enough.